everyone. It's an honour to be here with you today in Tottenham. And before I start, I'm going to own that I am not from Tottenham, I am from Edmonton. So if there's any border issues, all right, I apologise, but I do spend a lot of my time working in Tottenham, across London and across the UK. And so I hope what I have to share with you this afternoon will be of interest. What I want to focus on is how we rewrite the rules of child protection. And while that might seem a bit grandiose and confused, I want to take you right into the place where I'm trying to make that change before I help you think about the role you can play in creating safe places for our young people. And to take you into that world, I want to focus on the 9 cases that changed my view of how young people experience risk. And by the time I got to those 9 cases, I'd already spent years interviewing young people around the country, in our prisons, in our children's homes, in our schools, getting a sense of what they were experiencing on their streets and in their communities, and how things could be made better for them. But it was being sat with 9 cases that I was able to really critically think about the change that was needed. And there's lots of ways I could describe those 9 cases. I could describe them by talking about the offences they featured. 3 were murder cases, 6 were rape cases, all involving young people under the age of 16, harming other young people under the age of 16, and 145 of them were spread across those 9 cases when you included the peer groups involved. But I'm not going to describe those offences, and I'm not even really going to describe much about the individual young people involved. What I am going to talk to you about are the stairwells, the bus terminuses, the online spaces, the housing estates and parks, and even the school toilets where these incidents occurred. Because it was in sitting and looking at those places that I actually got a much better understanding of what was going on for our young people and why we needed to make a difference. And when I went back and looked at the research internationally into how young people experience violence, the same messages about place were writ large. They were just completely missing from the way we designed the systems intended to keep young people safe. When we looked at young people's households, we saw time and time again a disproportionate number of them living with domestic violence in their early years and through their adolescence, and the impact of those experiences not being addressed. We also saw young people co-offending and being victimised alongside older siblings. But the biggest message in the cases, and all too often seen in the research, was parents saying, "I have lost control of my child. The child I used to take to primary school and drop off and take to play dates, now has started to go to secondary school, they won't answer their phone. They won't come back on time. I don't know who they're talking to online, and I don't know how to get them back." And often we try to understand that parent by thinking about what was wrong with them. There must be a deficit, there must be something about them that means that they can't control their child. And so what we're going to do with that parent is send them on a parenting class, teach them how to be a parent, and then all will be better. Unfortunately, this was not what was happening for most of those parents. In fact, most of the young people, despite a disproportionate number living in homes that experience harm, most of those young people were living in safe and protective families when they were impacted by murder or serious incidents of sexual violence. And to understand the struggles of those parents, we needed to look beyond their front doors. And no other context was more significant than young people's peer relationships. And in the research, we see it all the time. We see studies that suggest that young men who are part of violent or aggressive peer groups are more likely to harm their partners than young men living in violent households. We know that the younger you are, the more likely you are to commit very serious offences in groups that you would never commit on your own. We even see that in the sentencings of judges who say, if you hadn't all been together, this young person that you killed would still be alive. But once you got together, very bad decisions were made. And the only way we can understand those groups is to think about the places and spaces in which they're spending their time. And all too often, in the cases I looked at, young people were forming, storming, and norming friendship groups in schools where they were exposed to bullying, problematic corridor culture, including the lifting of skirts and the pinging of bra straps during the transition to lesson, educational establishments being targeted by organised crime groups to recruit young people to traffic drugs across the country, and even soft messages in curriculum which focused on young people not sharing sexual images of themselves, that young people then translated as being, well, if you share an image of yourself and someone else onward shares it to 1,000 people, it's your fault. And when we asked young people, who's to blame if an image is shared of them around an entire school, they said, the person in the image. And when we asked them why, they said, because we've all been in the same classroom and we've all been told don't share an image. So if you do share an image and someone else onward shares it, you're responsible for the harm that you've faced. So there's a range of ways in which our school communities can create harmful environments for our young people, and likewise can create protective environments where young people can form healthy and secure attachments with peers. Likewise, in neighbourhood settings where young people are exposed to street-based victimisation, robbery, theft of bicycles, mobile phones, clothing, who can they turn to in their community to keep them safe? Who will stop the mobile phone being stolen again? Who steps in to offer that protection? And in one case I reviewed of a rape on a stairwell, all the young people involved in that rape received prison sentences. The victim in that case was moved to another part of the country, as were multiple relatives. 2 young women who gave evidence in that case for the prosecution were moved. A young man who also gave evidence was moved. The stairwell remained a hotspot for rape for another 6 years, with other young people using the exact same stairwell, and never was there an intervention with the stairwell, only with the children who used it. And we don't listen. As we've already heard from speeches today, young people have told us time and time again, there are particular places and spaces in which I feel unsafe. It's the design of those spaces, it is the lack of supervision in those spaces, means that I'm a different person when I close that front door behind me. I'm a different person when I walk through my school corridors. And we've also heard parents painfully describe the loss of their child, their attempts to regain control of that child, and completely breaking down the whole relationship and everything that they'd worked for in the past. So whether we're listening to the voices of parents, of young people, or decades of research into adolescent development, all roads lead to context. But we have a problem. We think we've done quite well in the UK. We've said that child sexual exploitation is child abuse, child criminal exploitation is child abuse, knife crime is abuse, youth violence is abuse, as if by saying something's abuse, we have a system that can therefore respond to it. And of course it's progress to recognise that these things cause harm to our young people and we should be concerned about them. But simply saying something is abuse does not magically mean that the systems designed to deal with abuse know what to do. And there's one fundamental problem with our system. It was only ever designed to protect children from the harm they faced in their families. That was the sole intention of the child protection system. So if you have a concern about a young person who's being groomed into selling drugs or being sexually exploited, you refer that child into social services, and it is that child and their parents who will become the subject of a social work assessment. And it is that child and the parent who will become the subject of that plan. Not the stairwell, not the school toilets, not the park, or the social media space where the abuse is actually occurring and will continue to occur despite work with the parents who have been affected by that harm. So we've raised the awareness of a range of people when we recognise risk outside of the family home, including taxi drivers, hoteliers, people that work in public settings, to be alert to the signs of abuse under the tagline that safeguarding is everybody's business. But that's interpreted as it being everybody's business to look out for the signs of abuse and refer them in. And you refer them into social services who then assess the child and the family and don't assess where the risk has emanated from. And what we get as a consequence is movement of children. Children being moved across schools, children being moved around the country, children even being secured into secure children's homes on welfare grounds for 3 months, 6 months at a time, costing thousands of pounds per week in order to get them away from the context that we have failed to change for them. And that is why we need to rewrite the rules of child protection. Because it's not enough to say that these are forms of abuse. We have to think about what that means for how our system responds. And so contextual safeguarding, when I first wrote it down on a piece of paper, about 4 years ago now, was proposed to address these issues and to rewrite the rules of child protection in 4 ways. And they're going to seem really common sense to people who don't work in the child protection field, but they are completely counterculture to everything we know about the way we do social work, not just in the UK, but across the Western world. For starters, the system needs to be able to target the context in which the abuse has occurred. Wow, light bulb moment, right? But actually, we don't assess the location where the abuse occurred. We assess the child who was abused there. As if we understand that child, we'll be able to magic the abuse away. So shifting our focus to actually assessing what happened in that location and what the relationship is between that location and child is important to creating safety. We must do this, however, through the lens of child protection. We already do a lot of place-based work in policing. You often see kind of increased numbers of police in areas where there have been complaints. I'm talking about a child protection approach to place-based risk. Only acting with a lens where we're focused on the welfare of children. Not solely to reduce crime, but to increase safety. But to do this, social workers need partnerships beyond the police, beyond health, beyond education. They need partnerships with a range of social actors, including those that work in parks and recreation, those that run the takeaway shops that young people go to after school, those that man the bus terminuses that wait for after school, because the window between 3:30 and 7 p.m. is the most vulnerable time for a teenager in this country. And they measure success not by a change in that child's behaviour alone, but by understanding that child's behaviour in context. To give you an example, in one case I reviewed, a young man was truanting from school. He was late to lessons, and then when he was in lessons, he would ask to use the toilet, disrupting his education and disrupting the education of others. And so school sanctions were used to try to keep him in class when he was there and to get him in on time. And those sanctions did not work. So social services were contacted, and it turned out he had a sibling with disabilities, and it was thought maybe parents are struggling to get everyone in on time, maybe he needs more support at home, and if we put that support in at home, then he will perform better at school. The support went in at home, his behaviour didn't change. So then there was a threat to fine his family for not getting him into school, and he started to come into school. So in terms of success measure, the fine, or the threat of it, was a success. He was truanting, we threatened to fine him, he's no longer truanting, all is well. I was then called in to review his case because a few weeks after his attendance improved, he was sexually and physically assaulted by a group of young men, some of whom were in school with him. And it then turned out he was coming in late to class because he would only come into a classroom when a teacher was in the room. If he came into the class before a teacher was in the room, he was assaulted in school. But if he came in after the teacher, he was late. He would then use the toilets during lessons when everyone else was in the classrooms, because if he went to the toilets during the break time, there were other students in the toilets and he'd be assaulted in the toilets. So the moment his truancy went away, he was more vulnerable. But because everyone was fixated on him as a measure of risk, rather than thinking about the context in which he was spending his time, the intervention from professionals increased his vulnerability. Working in this way expands how we think about safeguarding. Normally we ask, what is you, parents' capacity to keep this child safe? It must be improved. In a contextual safeguarding system, we're asking what is our collective capacity to keep young people safe. And we have to think about community guardianship. Who are the people in the places and spaces where young people are spending their time, places where they should be safe? And if they are not safe when they are in those places, it is the people who are there whose capacity is being undermined and must be enhanced. This means that safeguarding being everybody's business is not about making referrals into social care. Of course, we still refer our concerns in, but we all play a role in creating safe spaces for young people. And where this is being tested in different parts of the UK, we're seeing systems where you not only refer a child into children's social care, but you can refer a peer group, a school year, an entire school, a location into children's services. And social workers are now assessing those locations in the same way they assess families in order to create safety for young people. I really hope some of you are interested in coming on this journey with us and joining our network of thousands of practitioners, I know some are in the audience today, who are trying to create safety for young people in the places and spaces where they spend their time. We all have a role in doing this, and I hope I've made you see that. Please do get in touch with me. Thank you for your time.